Hi there, I'm going to talk about freehand perspective today. Freehand meaning you're not using a T-square, you're not using a straight edge, you're just using a pencil and a piece of paper. And you're going to use that pencil to measure and to sight with. And it really works well when you're trying to draw a corner in a room. That's my dog. When you're trying to draw a corner in a room. So the corner that I'm going to be most concerned with when drawing my freehand perspective drawing is from where this corner is meeting the floor all the way up to where that gray cabinet is meeting the ceiling. I want to see what these angles are here, this angle here, and that angle there. I want to get those angles right before I start the drawing. So when I sit down to do it, I have a pencil here that I'm going to use for a unit of measure. Now I positioned myself here and measured them just a minute ago, and when I went to measure, the length of that corner, it was 2 of these pencil lengths long. Now, the way I did that is I closed one eye. I put the bottom of the pencil down where that gray cabinet's meeting the floor. Put my finger on top of the pencil to know where it ended. Then carried my pencil up here to the ceiling. And I made it where it's 2 pencil lengths long. If I moved closer or further away, the ratio of the pencils with the actual measurement I'm seeing there could be different. So I made 2 hash marks here that represent 1, 2 pencil lengths. Then I laid down a straight line. Now that line, when I laid it down, one way we can check to see if a line's straight is to run our finger on one side of the paper and our thumb on the other and carry it down to make sure it's straight. But if you use gravity and your breath when you're trying to draw a straight line, you're going to be more successful. So if you don't have to make the sound, but if you breathe out and let the gravity of your hand just carrying down whatever direction you want the straight line to go, you're going to be more successful. So that's an important line. Now, I'm not drawing with a T-square, but you can always use a T-square to check your lines. So I'm going to come in here and check it. That's pretty straight. That's pretty straight. It wavers just a little bit. But this is a freehand perspective drawing. So since it is freehand, the lines are going to have far more character than if we draw them with a ruler or with a T-square. We want our lines to be drawn from a human being here with this type of drawing, and so it'll have much more personality. Well, since I got that line down, there's 2 more lines I have to put down that are critically important to starting this drawing, and that is the corner at the top where the gray cabinet's meeting the wall at the ceiling, and down at the bottom where the gray cabinet, well, that's the side of a dishwasher, is meeting the floor. I got to get the angles coming from those corners correct. So what I'm going to do in just a minute is hold my pencil up to those corners horizontally, down to this corner horizontally from back there to see what direction those angles are going in relation to horizontal. There's a couple of ways I'm going to approach this. So I want to know the angle here. So I'm going to hold my pencil up there. Now this is sighting, this isn't measuring. Sighting was what I was seeing how long or short something was, measuring was. But sighting is where you're trying to see what direction things are going. So if I hold my pencil horizontally up there, I can see that this cabinet's going in this direction, and the wall is not quite as foreshortened, but just because of where I'm sitting, or excuse me, not as severe an angle, and it's going more in this direction. Now I can always, modify those later if necessary, but I'm just going to lightly sketch it in there. And then I can also actually hold my pencil the direction of the cabinet and bring it right down here and check to see, and that looks about right. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3 lines. They're really important lines because we're trying to get that corner established. Now down below, same thing. I'm holding my pencil horizontally down at that corner to see what direction that dishwasher's going. And it's going about that direction. And then I'm holding my pencil where that little white baseboard is, going to the left of the dishwasher, and it's going slightly downhill. So now, folks, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. Let me recheck this one. You can always check again and again. That one's slightly off. That's okay. You can always check again and again, you know, because if these initial measurements and your initial sighting is off, the whole drawing will be off. Another thing I want to point out before I continue is where I'm sitting has to be a constant. My eye level can't change. My eye level comes about somewhere with those paper towels right now. So anything below those paper towels, below my eye level. Anything above the top, you know, those paper towels is above my eye level. That's really, really important. When I do these corners up here, these lines were going up like this because that corner is above my eye level, where the corner down here, these lines were coming, you know, we'll call them downhill because that corner is below my eye level. So I'm gonna continue drawing this and start building it and letting it, you know, progressively grow, and you'll be able to see how I go about this. So this drawing, as it progresses, you keep sighting and you keep measuring. Now I'm starting to lay things in loosely here. But what I did was I measured the length of that cabinet to get it right here. And I measured the length of the dishwasher, you know, from the floor to as high as it's going to get that right there. And then I had to check this angle by holding my pencil up horizontally, along with this one. And I had to make sure, you know, my angles of my floor are still being consistent. My angles of my counter are still consistent. And then there's a little foreshortening under here. Actually, I think this line has to come over even a little bit more than it is now. We oftentimes don't want to believe when we're drawing boxes that we're seeing this little sliver at the bottom of a box, because we know it's, you know, we intellectually know it's a rectangle or a square, and when we draw it as a sliver, we're thinking that can't be, and our mind's going to argue with us, which is one of the problems we run into when we're drawing, period. Our intellect wants to argue with the foreshortening. So I've got this corner here established, and here's my little baseboard. And what I want to get now is how far down the door's coming from the ceiling. So I'm going to measure again. Hey, when you're measuring, you know I mentioned it earlier, it's so important that you keep your elbow locked always, and you keep your shoulders square always, and you keep, you know, your postures in a similar way. If you're down here measuring versus sitting up straight measuring versus leaning back measuring, it's going to be inconsistent. And if you're measuring with one shoulder back versus your shoulder square, it's going to be inconsistent. And if you have your elbow bent at various angles while you're doing your drawing, you're going to get inconsistent measurements. So it's important that you try to maintain, you know, whatever posture you were in when you're trying to measure, and with your shoulders square and elbow locked, so you're consistent. That's really, really important with measuring, because sometimes we'll make a drawing and say, hey, why is everything so whack? Maybe we were measuring from, you know, all different positions. The drawing's frozen, so we have to draw it more or less, you know, from a fixed position. So I'm going to measure it from the ceiling down to the top of that doorway, and I'm measuring here. I'm bringing it down here, and it's right there. Now I can draw the angle for the top of that door. Now you can just draw things in loosely right now, folks. You know, you don't have to commit to anything at this point. And then you can say, okay, how wide is that door from here? And sitting here, once again, I want to make sure everything's lined up right. It's coming to right here. Now that's real valuable information, because I have the width of the door, and I know where the door is going to come down to meet the floor. And I can just carry my line down here before I continue things across here. Something else I want to point out right now is when we are drawing, we look at things when we're looking at the world, we look at it from a 60-degree cone of vision. So when I'm looking at this corner from here, my 60-degree cone of vision from this distance is going to take in the ceiling and the floor, about over to that painting, and maybe all the way over to the side of that wine table over there. If I want to draw something over to the left, over to the right, on the ceiling, on the floor, I actually have to tilt my head up or down or look in different directions. That's changing our point of view. Our cone of vision is about this 60-degree angle, or cone rather, and anything outside of that is our peripheral. And we really have no way of putting peripheral into our drawing. Peripheral is great when you're driving, when you're doing just about anything. You have to see what's either side of you, above or below. You see movement happening to your side without even looking at it. But if I'm to draw something over there or over there, all of a sudden I'm looking over there and I'm kind of panning an area and circling around to try to draw it, which is inconsistent with a human being's cone of vision. So when I continue this, I'm going to continue this drawing a little more. I've got the width and length of my door figured out. And if I don't like this line here that I drew, I can see it's a little bit off. I just straighten it out a little bit. Where the window's going in behind the cabinet here. I've drawn this line here, which is the red wall there. I drew this strong vertical here coming down. And what I want to do now it's arguably starting to get a little bit out of my cone of vision, but I want to hold my pencil, up to that corner to check this angle. This angle here of the top of this cabinet is going to be in line with this one, because they're going the same direction, but this one, the wall is a little higher, so it's going to be up here. And so when I lay my line in for the wall, let me check it again. I can always turn my paper too. When I draw that line for the wall, I want to make sure that I'm consistent, because it's all exists in the same space. And this, this house is built out of right angles. Everything I'm drawing is essentially right angles thus far. So we have to make sure they're consistent with the right angles. Here I started making some lines and sort of measuring, how far apart each of those windows were. I drew a straight line down here, and then took some time to kind of, divide these up. They may not be perfect yet, but as I develop them, they'll look more and more believable. Something we have to keep in mind while we're doing this is it's not surgery. So if a line is slightly off, the patient doesn't die, that doesn't give us license to say I'm going to draw whatever, but the human element that comes into this type of drawing is really cool. The fact that you see a human hand drawing it versus once again a T-square drawing it. So I got the ceiling down there, and I'm going to look down at the bottom here where the wall's meeting the floor. And it's coming down. There's a baseboard down there, so I'm going to pay attention to that. And then it's coming out about like this. Now this angle has to be consistent with this angle. It can't go some other direction, because once again, we're dealing with right angles here. 90-degree angles, folks. So I can start getting, so what I've done now is by putting this line in, and getting this angle, and I'm not convinced that's right. That might be, I might have to bring that up a little bit more, and it's perfectly fine to check and recheck lines. But anyway, by putting this vertical in, getting this angle correct, and getting this angle correct, I'm able to start putting this wall in. In a little while, I'm gonna draw that trash can and explain how to put a cylinder in. But back to this. There's some baseboards coming down here, but you guys can't see because the camera's to the left of me. But I'll start progressively putting more things in. Starting to get a few more dimensions in here. The thickness of the top of this trim over the cabinet, and then the trim on the side of this cabinet door. Details last with this stuff. Once in a while, I like to come in and start adding a little more detail as I'm moving along. But it's so important to get everything laid in correctly. Then you can come in and do all the detail you want. Because if you have a lot of detail, but the perspective's off, then the drawing just doesn't look good. Something I want to address right now, though, is that trash can. So I've been talking about how everything I'm drawing is right angles. You know, disregard the paper towels and bottles here right now, or this section over here. But everything I've been drawing has been right angles. Now what I've got here is a trash can. And what a trash can is a cylinder. And something we know about cylinders, I know the lid's a little bit, you know, is a little bit curved. But something we know about cylinders is they are circular at the top and circular at the bottom. So if circles by definition are perfect, then a foreshortened circle, which is an ellipse, should be perfect too. And it can be a little bit tricky. But a couple of things I want to talk about here is I put some straight lines down here to facilitate me with drawing this ellipse here, and another one down here to facilitate me with drawing the curvature at the bottom of the trash can. But after measuring the length of the trash can, which happens to be a pencil length, now that sounds strange because, you know, I'm telling you it's 2 pencil lengths of that wall over there. This trash can's a pencil length long because the trash can's so much closer to us. So obviously it's gonna, you know, appear larger as it gets closer to us. So that's just, you know, how we view the world. That's perspective. So anyway, I've got my cylinder and it's verticals on either side. You got verticals on either side of a cylinder. If you have to position your paper so it's more advantageous for you to draw, by all means do. So the lid of that trash can, we'll just start it as a basic ellipse right now. The ellipse, you know, has to come around and curve and then come around the other side and curve. The ellipse can never come to a point. So it just keeps curving on this long axis. You can kind of put a long axis and a short axis through an ellipse. You can get it a little more centered than that to facilitate your ability to draw the ellipse more accurately. The trash can lid has some thickness to it, so I'm going to go ahead and carry this line over. And notice I'm positioning my paper so that I have an easier time drawing it. I don't want to be turning my arm all different directions trying to get somewhere to draw when I can, with the exception of, you know, if you're doing a mural, I guess, or an extremely large painting, you can manipulate your surface to you know, whatever position you want, so you're able to draw things, you know, more comfortably. This curvature at the bottom, now I have this horizontal here. Now this curvature is not too good right now, because if it's an ellipse, you know, it should be perfect by the time, if you were to see through it, if it were transparent. So by putting this horizontal down here, I can then come in and say, I don't like the bottom of that curve, so I'm going to do something about it. And it should be about 50-50 on either side. Then there's the curve down here, the trim at the bottom. Then you can start, you know, drawing in the pedal to open the trash can, but getting the detail of that's something that will happen later in the drawing. So come back up to this ellipse. I'm still not completely happy with this, so I can modify it a little bit more. But ellipses, cylinders, are one of the things students struggle with the most. Let's put a little bit of the trash bag in there. See, I'm cheating again by putting some detail in. Are some of the things that students struggle with the most because this is a circle. We know it's a circle, but we're seeing it as a foreshortened circle, therefore an ellipse. And once again, our brain wants to argue with us that it can't possibly be that thin. Over here, I started to draw the wine table here. And then, you know, this is back to right angles. Now, this angle and this angle are going to be slightly different because this one's a little further away. I mean, this one, excuse me, this one's further to the left than this one. These three lines have to be parallel. And then you got to kind of sight to check the angles for the side of the table and here. I don't know how well you can see it, but there's a curved drawer there. So I'm going to put a horizontal under here to try to get that curve accurate. So when I come in to do the detail later, I already have, you know, proper proportions to work with. This table now, you know, things guys are really, I mean, to be honest, are starting to get out of the cone of vision down here. You know, I'm looking down at this table leg. But as long as I'm creating it in the space and all of this information is correct, I should be okay with this. I had to measure the length of that table that I'm seeing it from here. And the length of that table is less than a pencil length. Now that sounds really crazy because we know how big and long that pencil is. Pardon the mess. We know how big and long that that table is. We know how long it is. I mean, we know it's longer than that, but we have to believe the foreshortening and we have to check the angle with our pencil. So it's not quite a pencil length long, so that's why I put this here. This line will progressively become more of a curve because the table curves slightly there. This is a straight line, as is this. And the front of the table curves slightly. This can all be modified later. I measured the length of my table leg there. It was 1.5 pencil lengths long. And then this got a little tricky because I just brought a straight line down here, brought this down and started getting the curve of the leg by using this vertical that I established to work against. Now, once again, that's something can be modified more, but we essentially have the table laid in where it belongs. I started building some more things in here. One thing I want to talk about, though, that I didn't talk about earlier is drawing through. When I drew this initial, bottom of this wall here, this baseboard, I drew the trash can right on top of it because we don't want to draw a line on one side of a form and then try to figure out where it's coming out on the other side of the form. Drawing through takes care of that for us, just as is happening with the drawing through of the countertop here and these paper towels and different bottles drawn on the countertop. If we start, stop, it turns into a real inconsistent line and looks too jagged. So drawing through is important all the time. I started adding, some of the plants and different things on top of this wine table here. And I want to talk briefly about these boards. There's boards on the floor, and they're going the same direction as this angle that I initially got here. And then as I start drawing the boards on the floor over here, I just have to pay attention as I'm moving across what direction they're coming in relation to me. The closer they get over to where I'm sitting, the more they're going to come down as almost a vertical here, almost a vertical at this point. So if you draw them all the same angle all the way across, it's not going to look right because where we're sitting determines how we're seeing them. Okay, back to this. I was putting in the doorknob and the deadbolt here. I was putting some of the detail on my state-of-the-art wall air conditioner here, starting to place where the clock is. But one thing that I want to talk about that I haven't yet, this is really important, is that verticals must be vertical. So with this type of drawing, since I'm drawing right angles, and I'm not drawing it distorted, I'm not looking down on it, I'm not looking straight up, I'm looking straight across, the verticals have to be vertical. So the construction of this house, these walls, this cabinet, this door, they're all right angles. That means 90-degree angles. All of this is 90 degrees. So unless I had some type of curved cabinet or a cabinet coming in at an angle, this is a vertical, as is this, as is this, as is this, as is either side of this trash can, as is either side of this air conditioning unit. So verticals have to be a constant. You can't just kind of wing those because as soon as they start going crooked, your drawing loses all validity and it just doesn't look professional anymore. So keep that in mind when you're putting your lines down. You're putting them down freehand, and you can check them, like I said, by putting your finger on one side of the paper and your thumb in the drawing to see if they're coming down straight. But if they're not vertical, the whole drawing kind of falls apart. So the drawing's progressed a little further here. I'm starting to add some value in here, but this is essentially a line drawing. And as it's a line drawing, one of the things we can do to make things even appear, more in perspective than you already have by having your angles down correctly, is sometimes in the foreground we'll make the lines a little darker than the lines in the middle ground. If you had a background back here, if this wall weren't here and perhaps there was subject matter further away, or if I was going to draw the fence outside, those lines might even become thinner and lighter just to create even more the illusion of things receding in space. But I'm just coming in here and having fun putting some touches in. I'm looking for, some areas, the lights changed a little bit, where there's some shadows. Once again, this is a line drawing, so this is just some value I'm adding in because I feel like it. But these drawings are perfectly legitimate with just line. Okay, so when is a drawing finished? That's something you've probably asked yourselves many times. You've had the experience of working on something and halfway through it looks really good and then you destroyed it by overworking it. Well, the longer you draw, the longer you paint, you sort of intuitively know that you've accomplished what you set out to accomplish for a particular drawing or painting. For this drawing, I could go further, I could add more detail, I could add shading, I could render much more. But for our purposes, for my purpose of explaining to you how to create the illusion of perspective, freehand, without any rulers, without any T-squares, using just a pencil, sighting and measuring with just a pencil, this drawing has progressed as far as I want it to. So when you start practicing something like this, at first it might feel a little bit alien to you, but then the more you do it, the more you become used to it. And then once you learn how to do this, it's an incredible tool because you can draw any setting and it's going to look believable because you got the illusion of space put into your page successfully.